somewhere Nephi built a ship. Chief Captain Moroni dug trenches as fortifications, and a last desperate battle was fought at a hill called Kimura. These things didn't happen in a vague nowhere land. Yet because we do not know their precise geographical locations, it is tempting to read the Book of Mormon as if the people it describes were abstractions in a lost, untouchable world. To add flesh and blood to them, to give their message urgency and passion, light from the dust has been created. Using the best existing information, authors Scott and Maureen Proctor have traveled 2 continents with a camera, trying to capture on film the feelings, the light and shadow, the sights that may have been common to the people of the Book of Mormon.
The street sign that says Zarahemla city limits has not been discovered yet. Neither do we know where the Valley of Lemuel is in the Arabian Peninsula. But there are clues in the Book of Mormon itself that lead us to where these places might be.
So we took our camera and 400 rolls of film and went to explore the Arabian Peninsula and Central America, looking for those possible locations where Book of Mormon events might have happened.
I think we've read the Book of Mormon for years, perhaps just as a history book. But now we see an emerging series of patterns, a series of patterns that the Lord is trying to teach to us.
Lehi's journey begins in 1 Nephi, and we see that they leave Jerusalem, which represents the world. The world is about to be destroyed, and the Lord is going to save his righteous by pulling them out. Then they go through a wilderness journey. Now, this wilderness journey is difficult. It's hot. Food is difficult to find. Watering holes may be from 20 to 60 miles apart. And what do they learn in this kind of very rugged environment? They're purged from the world. And finally, and only then, being ready for the Promised Land is a pattern that occurs again and again in Scripture.
I think the type that we see most clearly is Moses and the children of Israel. They come out of Egypt, they go into this wilderness journey, and while they're there in the wilderness, they must have Egypt purged from their hearts. And then they finally arrive in the Promised Land. We see it with the Mormon pioneers as well. They leave the United States, they go into the wilderness, and finally arrive in the Promised Land. So that pattern is there again and again, but more importantly, in our own lives.
That's right. What is true in the macrocosm is true in the microcosm as well of our own lives. Mortality is a wilderness journey. It's meant to be hard. It's only through going through this wilderness journey that we're ready for the Promised Land, which is life again with God. And what do we learn on this wilderness journey? Well, we're finally pitted against our own insufficiencies. We find that our best efforts aren't enough, and we finally learn that we are ultimately dependent on the Lord. As he told the people in the Book of Mormon, you will know that it is by me that ye are led in the wilderness. And as he said to the children of Israel, I will be your light in the wilderness.
Let's consider how really tough this wilderness experience is for them. We're talking about a place that is one of the most desolate regions on the face of the planet. They are absolutely dependent on the Lord for food and water. And it is tough to get food, it is tough to get water, and the kind of things that we see in the record are dealing with this. And you're dependent on the Lord day by day. And you can't go very long without either of those things, and so they have to deal with that issue. And the Lord blesses them day by day. It's that kind of experience, interaction with the Lord.
Well, and they had to consider everyone they came upon in the wilderness as an enemy. In fact, you get that sense when the Lord tells them not to make fire. That means they're eating their food raw. That means they catch a sheep or a goat, and they eat the raw liver, and they eat the flesh raw, because they couldn't make fire because everyone in the desert is considered an enemy. So there's that kind of suspicion, that kind of fear for your life. Also the weather conditions. They don't even talk as they ride along day after day because you can't talk, you get thirsty. The wind is blowing, the sandstorms are terrible. There are times when you think, how can I go on? Why does the Lord allow the wilderness to be so really difficult for Lehi and for each of us in our own experience?
And that's the whole point of this. The Lord wants each of us to come to know him.
Now, what route did Lehi's family take into the wilderness? It's not certain which side of the Dead Sea they came down, possibly the King's Highway in Jordan, then along southeast along the Red Sea, getting to a place finally that was called Nahom. Now, every place else they went, they named, but finally they came to a place that was already called Nahom. It was a civilized place, possibly in the ancient kingdom of Sheba.
And there are archaeological evidence is here. There's an ancient city called Barakish, which is 3,000 years old. They may very well have come right past the city. And also in this area, and there is a tribe that still lives here that's been here over 1,000 years called Nahum. And that is a Hebrew word meaning place of consolation or place of sorrowing. And so here are all these thousands of ancient graves. And this very well may be the place that Ishmael was buried, right in this area.
And from Nahum then, they turned directly east, probably skirting the empty quarter, which, by the way, the first time that there was ever a recorded crossing of the empty quarter was 1928. But from Nahum to the Arabian Sea was the area where Nephi called their place of much affliction. They really waded through difficulty from Nahum heading east.
You know, the use of this Liahona is an amazing thing. And Lehi and his family are taught to exercise great faith in the Lord. And as they're going through this labyrinth in the desert, they come to certain places and they wonder perhaps, and yet the spindles say to do something, and there they are, standing perhaps at the top of a canyon that's 2,500 feet deep. And they can't see where it's going, but the Liahona says, go into the canyon. And that's what they have to do.
You know, it's interesting. There's been some research done lately on the possible location of Bountiful, where Nephi built the ship. We get many clues about the search for this place from the Book of Mormon because Nephi gives us such a wonderful description. He tells us, for instance, that it's a place where we find hardwood trees, large enough and plentiful enough to be able to build a ship. It has to be a place that's on the seashore, accessible from the land. It has to have a mountain nearby because he goes to the mount oft and prays oft. It has to be a place of much fruit to the Bedouin, that is, usually date palm. It has to have a fresh water source. It has to have a source of ore. It has to have a source of flint or something to make fire.
So is there a place that fits the description from the Book of Mormon located in Arabia today? And yes, there is. The place is called Wadi Saik. Now, a wadi is a riverbed, an ancient riverbed, and it's dry. But in the desert, it may run with water 3 or 4 minutes every 50 years. But the desert people travel on these byways because if there's going to be any vegetation at all, it's going to be in the riverbed. Now, the interesting thing about this particular wadi is they're coming through this canyon, and you can't tell that you're going to be at the ocean until literally less than a mile away from the ocean. And that's kind of the way it is in our lives, isn't it?
And the thing that is so amazing in our lives is that we have to sometimes endure to the end of a challenge, endure just 5 more minutes before we can see the solution. But we do have to trust in the Lord. Now, the amazing thing about Wadi Saik is it is a beach that is extremely remote, near the Yemen and Oman border.
All these evidences are there. We don't know that this is the exact place, but it certainly becomes vivid for us who have read this story all of our lives, that this may very well be that place.
And the shore drops right off here. It's very deep. It's a wonderful place to launch a ship. We sat on that shore and looked out at that vast sea and thought, these were desert people. How would they feel launching into the unknown world? They were leaving behind everything that was mapped and known to them, based on the word of the Lord. I was once writing a script on the Book of Mormon and had some very specific cultural questions that I wanted to ask Hugh Nibley. I called him and he said he'd give me some time if I would follow him around with a notebook while he ran around campus. I was eager to take him up on it, and I asked him question after question, to which he answered, "It's in there. It's in there. It's in there." It was a wonderful lesson for me, and since then we really learned that it's true. That is, so many of the questions that we think we can't answer are already in the Book of Mormon if we just search carefully.
So what kind of clues do we have in the Book of Mormon? We have 54 verses, for example, that refer to the land or city of Nephi. It gives us many geographical clues. 76 verses which talk about the land or city of Zarahemla. We see some patterns. So putting all these clues together, is there a basic landmass that fits the description given in the Book of Mormon? Well, going from the Straits of Magellan on the south, clear to the north at the Aleutian Islands, there's only one place that fits, and that is Mesoamerica. It's a place where, yes, there is a land barrier running east and west across the area, the Cuchimatani Mountains, and you go to the west wilderness and there's the Sierra Madres, which potentially fits that description, and then you go to the east side and there is the Paytan and part of that jungle lowlands area, which is also a barrier. So all of this fits into the clues given in the record itself.
Well, there are other reasons besides just the geography that point us to Guatemala and southern Mexico as the possible lands of the Book of Mormon. There's also the idea that Mesoamerica, as that region is called, was a very sophisticated area. 90% of the ruins in the Americas that date to that period of time are found in Mesoamerica. It was also the only area where there was a written language when the Spanish came to America. They were sophisticated in astronomy and agriculture and architecture, so we know that this was a high degree of civilization. So our attention is pointed there for other reasons. Basic outlines of their history are not dissimilar to what we read in the Book of Mormon.
There is this underlying message in the Book of Mormon that Jesus Christ wants to be our God. He pleads with us, he invites us to come to him. And so it was with the ancient nations featured in the Book of Mormon. There was an eternal decree placed upon the land of whatsoever nation should possess it, should serve God, or should be swept off.
And we saw evidences of that sweeping off wherever we went in Central America. The jungle simply covers up the ancient cities till you can't even tell they're there. We were at a city 18 miles wide. You could see no visible sign that it was even there. It was totally swallowed up.
Well, and there's places where whole cities have been swallowed into calderas, collapsed volcanoes. They're under lakes now. Or there's places where the lava flows have come over and covered areas 30, 40 feet high, and you can see the remains of the civilization beneath these. The Lord really did a sweeping.
He did. We spent an entire day following a dirt road into the jungle that was so hard to follow. We could only make about 5 miles an hour, and the ruts were, well...
3 times the size of our
we'd go
suburban.
into it, wonder if we'd come out again. It took us a long time to get back to this ancient jungle site. And it was so totally encompassed. After all that effort, we couldn't even see it. And we thought, the Lord has made good his promise. What I have spoken, he says, and I excuse not myself. His word is good, his word is sure, and we really felt that, seeing the remains, or hardly seeing the remains of the civilizations there.
In fact, it's interesting, we were talking to an archaeologist once, and he said that there were over 100,000 sites in Mesoamerica, and other archaeologists said, oh, no, that's conservative. I mean, there are, everywhere you go, there are sites, and there are mountains, and there are pyramids that are encompassed in jungle. And in fact, I think about 5% of the ruins have only been touched, or less than 5%. There's just a very few. And the ones that you've seen are the Mayan cities of Tikal and Palenque, and these ones that most people are familiar with. But the more ancient cities are still encompassed in. We saw some very interesting symbols in the jungles in Central America, and I think one of the most interesting ones was this thing called a killer tree. It starts as this innocent little vine that begins to climb right up another tree. And it's very small, and it starts sending out feelers around a very large tree, a host. It's a parasite, and then it begins sucking out the juice, the life of this tree, and finally completely destroys the tree. And this is an amazing phenomenon. These killer trees are similar to how Satan tries to work with the people of the Lord. He puts out his temptations. He tries to do everything to lead the people away from the Lord and to completely put them away from the Spirit of the Lord.
So what's the nature of the sin that we see in the Book of Mormon? Well, it's that sin of sophistication, of intellectual bravado, of self-importance, ultimately, of course, of pride. It's that impulse to be number one. And where does it come from? From Satan, of course, who originally wanted to be number one. And he wanted everybody else to be below him. That idea of pride is not just taking pride in who you are, but looking and seeing that everyone else is below you, and always weighing and measuring. It is the idea that we are a law unto ourselves, that man is the measure of all things. And we know, of course, that the people of the Lord look to him and look to the idea of casting off that part of them that isn't acceptable.
So what we see in these great buildings in Mesoamerica is not what the Nephites stood for, but it's what their descendants descended to through apostasy.
Satan says survival of the fittest. Only a few can triumph, and they get there by stepping on others. The Lord says, come unto me. I have room for all. All can be joined heirs with Christ. We can be certain that every event and every scripture that is recorded in the Book of Mormon was selected by the Lord. And so, if an idea recurs over and over again in that 1,000-year period of history that's given us, we can be certain it's something the Lord wants us to know. Now, in Mosiah, there's a pattern that recurs. First, with the people of Limhi. Second, with the people of Alma. And third, with Alma the Younger. It is a pattern of bondage. The first two groups find themselves in political bondage, and Alma the Younger finds himself in the bondage of sin. It's with this recurring pattern the Lord's saying to us, I want your attention. This is important.
So beginning with the people of Limhi. Limhi was the son of wicked King Noah, and he was living in the city of Nephi. Now it's interesting, there is an archaeological site in Guatemala that fits very nicely the description that is given of the city of Nephi. In fact, when we were there, I was familiar with all the references in the Book of Mormon to the city or land of Nephi, and the archaeologist we were with, we were talking to him, and I said, now if this is going to be that site, then there has to be a pass on the backside of the city. Now, Near Eastern thinking would say the backside is on the west. And so he said, come on, let's go. And we literally were running across the city because the light was changing.
That's right, the light was going down and we had to run.
And we were shooting these pictures so quickly. So anyway, we went to the west side of the city, and sure enough, on the west side of the city, here's this pass, this narrow pass that goes out the back of the city. And it was so exciting. Anyway, Limhi and his people are in bondage. And Gideon steps forth, and he becomes the instrument in the hands of the Lord to get them out of bondage. But it is the Lord is the only one who could release them from bondage. And that's the first of those series of stories on bondage.
What we see in these bondage patterns is the great love and caring of the Lord for his children. Not only are the people of Limhi in bondage, the people of Alma. Not only is Alma the Younger in bondage, but we all find ourselves as Alma the Youngers. We're all caught in sin. We all have to wrestle with the natural man. We all find ourselves often with taskmasters put upon us that we wouldn't choose. Financial insecurity or unstable relationships or other things that we wouldn't want. And how do we get out of it? Well, the pattern is clear here. We do all we can do. But ultimately, it's the Lord who delivers us. For generations in the church, we have thought that the Hill Kimura, where the last battle of the Nephites and the Jaredites took place, was in New York State. Well, that certainly was the Kimura, where Joseph was directed by Moroni to find the plates. But lately, as scholars have been looking more carefully at the Book of Mormon, they have wondered if maybe there are two Kimuras. The Kimura where Moroni buried the plates, and perhaps there's another Kimura where the last battle took place. That Kimura would be in Central America.
Well, one of the big clues is right in the record itself. We have the Limhi expedition, and of course we've talked about the people of Limhi being in bondage, and so they sent out a search party, almost in desperation, to try to find the land of Zarahemla. So they went out on their journey, went through this complex terrain and wilderness, and they must have missed the road to Zarahemla, but they ended up in the land of Kimura, where the Jaredites were destroyed. And they picked up breastplates and things and brought back the plates of ether and brought them back as evidence of this place. But they thought they'd found Zarahemla, see? So in their minds, they thought, well, we've come about that distance and maybe this is it. Oh, Zarahemla must have been destroyed. But in the meantime, they found the wrong place. But if they had gone clear to New York from Central America, it would have been thousands of miles. They would have gone across numerous geographic barriers, and they probably would have recorded something of that nature. So that makes us look at the picture much smaller than we've thought for all these generations.
That's right. So if the action of the Book of Mormon takes place in Central America, possibly, then the Hill Kimura would probably be in Central America as well. And that begins to give us some new thoughts. There are some things we look for when we look for a possible candidate for Hill Kimura.
Well, the most obvious thing that you're going to look for is fortifications. We have to look for patterns in the record, and one of the patterns we see is Mormon. In those last series of battles, for about 58 years, Mormon and his people are being driven by the Lamanites. And in fact, they end up through 10 different cities, and they fortify every one of them with their might. And they finally get to that 10th city, and the Jordan-Boaz complex of cities, and they finally fall, and they send a letter to the king of the Lamanites, and they say, we're going to meet you at this place, and we're going to have a battle up there. And you see that they've all those times fortified. They fortified with their might. They fortified. So if you're going to find a land of Kimura, a place where they had the last battle, you're going to be looking for fortifications, massive fortifications. Mormon indicates in the record that they did march forth into the land of Kimura, hoping that they might there gain some advantage over the Lamanites. And what that advantage might have been was that they were going to the very place where the Jaredites had been in their last battle, and they had already fortified the region. They may have been building on those very fortifications. It was also a land of many waters. They could support a large population. It's a very fertile land because of all of this water. And so, is there a land in Mesoamerica that fits this description? Yes, there is. In the Tuxtla Mountains of southern Mexico, there is a particular area, a basin, that is almost naturally fortified, but also it's about 2 miles by 2.5 miles wide. And we went there with Dr. Richard Houck, and he began to show us this area that he'd already discovered. And we began to see more and more of these man-made fortifications prepared for a massive battle.
One of the poignant things that we experienced was that someone had found a group of artifacts in the area, and among them was a whistle that to this very day you could blow and hear a haunting sound, a child's whistle. And it reminds us that it wasn't just soldiers who were ready for war that were decimated in this awful last battle, but women and children. And what fear must have come upon them as they saw their best laid plans come to nothing.
And of course, this is a poignant message for our time. I mean, the Lord gave us this record as a message for our time. And if we didn't catch it once, he tells us again. 2 whole nations were destroyed because of wickedness, and he warns us of the same. In order to search out the lands of the Book of Mormon, we started by gathering all the clues that were in the record itself, but then also going to all the scholarship that has been put together on the lands of the Book of Mormon, searching through everyone's lifetimes of study, trying to figure out these places. And really, there's not as much disagreement as you would think. The theories all lead us, of course, through the Arabian Peninsula, but also into Central America, into a general region that's common for most of the scholars.
That's right. Many don't agree on the exact places. They might have different ideas about where Zarahemla might be or the land of Nephi. But serious scholarship does tend to focus on Mesoamerica. As we walked across this battlefield that may be Kimura, it was sobering because these people were no longer imaginary and fantastic, and this last battle was no longer far away and distant. These were real people, and we thought about Mormon and identified with him as he pled with his people as they were sliding from the light.
And Moroni, as he said towards the last of the record, "Behold, I speak unto you as if ye are present, and yet ye are not. But behold, Jesus Christ hath shown you unto me, and I know you're doing." And there is poignancy in this with Moroni and Mormon as they write unto us this record, a message for our time.
They plead with us to be wise. As with the other 2 books in this series, our goal with Light from the Dust is to make the Book of Mormon, in this case, very visual and exciting. You know, we think of Nephi and Lehi, and we think they're abstractions who lived in nowhere land, but no, they were real people who lived in real places and had practical problems to solve. We have grown up as a visual generation, and that's one of the ways we learn, and so we wanted to take this visual aspect and add it to our learning about the Book of Mormon. We're hoping that the book works like a movie, scene by scene, so that as you read that piece from the Book of Mormon and get some understanding of it, there's a picture of the very place or the very candidate for the place that might have been where these things happened.
And we'll do just about anything to get a picture. People who know us know that we go on these high adventure journeys to get our pictures, and it is amazing what we go through to capture these pictures. In fact, one of the times we were out in Yemen, which is the southwestern cap of the Arabian Peninsula, and we were in this very dangerous area. There was a lot of civil unrest. We went through 13 military checkpoints that morning to get to the place that we wanted to shoot this picture. And we came to this ancient city of Barakish, a 3,000-year-old city, and we went up over this rise, and we found ourselves right in a tank nest and a machine gun nest. But the wind was blowing just right, and it was the heat of the day. They were all in their tents, and so we quickly backed out, and we thought, oh, boy, stay out of there. And so anyway, we went out into the desert to shoot our pictures, and this is in the ancient area of Nahom, where Ishmael is the likely place where Ishmael died. And then as we came back through, all these guys were awake, and they had surrounded the city, and they all have machine guns, you know, so we're driving past the city again to get out of there, and this one takes off after us, and he has his hand on the trigger, and he's yelling at us, that means stop, you know, and
At least that's what we thought it meant.
We think it means stop, and I said, Maureen, don't look at him. Whatever you do, don't look at him. We just held steady on as if we didn't even recognize he was there, and I said, if he fires on us, we'll stop, and he's just coming for us.
Oh, and I could just feel the hair on this side of my head standing up, knowing that he was coming for us with the machine gun. And then, to make matters worse, we come to the place where we can turn right and head back toward safety, or left and go deeper into the situation, and of course we need to get the perfect picture, so we turn left. And we can hear this machine gun fire coming at us from the other direction. It sounds just about like this. This is not an easy moment of high confidence. Scott is sitting at the camera, and he's taking these pictures, and all the time this machine gun is coming closer and closer and closer, and finally I'm just sitting there thinking, oh, hurry, please hurry. I just can't wait as he's snapping off each one. Think, oh, he gets to the end of the film. I'm so excited. He loads another roll of film in. He hasn't got the perfect picture yet. I said, oh, Scott, it's every man for himself, and I ran to the
took
Jeep.
off for the Jeep.
Remember our children. And he came very closely after, too, after he had taken all the frames he needed.
But that picture turned out wonderfully. In fact, we affectionately call that picture Machine Gun Nahom.
That's right.
And it is a beautiful picture.
There is a place called Wadi Saik that's on the border of Oman and Yemen that remarkably fits the description that Nephi gives of Bountiful. He's quite specific in his description. Wadi Saik has hardwood trees for building a ship. It has a source to make fire, a flint. It has a fresh water source. It has a mount right nearby. And this place we went to shoot, it's a beach that's only about a mile wide, and there are cliffs that go straight down to the ocean on either side, so it's almost inaccessible today by any way but water. But while we were there, we saw the most remarkable things. The report that we had read had mentioned that there was a mound and that there were a double line of stones that lead from the mound, and also graffiti on a rock face in which was actually recorded a ship. But we saw things that went way beyond that. It was clear that this had been a port for some time in the past, and as we were there, we saw an oval shape on the beach that resembled a ship site. We saw a stone that could have possibly been used for a foundry. We felt like as we were there, our eyes were open to see things in a way that we had never quite seen them before.
One of the most thrilling things that we experienced while we were putting together this book was going into the Tuxtla Mountains of southern Mexico. Most of the scholarship to today leads us to this area of the last battle site, the land of many waters. We went into this incredible place that had been discovered by Dr. Richard Houck, and he led us into this basin, this area, and of course the place of the last battle, there have to be fortifications. There have to be massive fortifications because they spent 4 years preparing for this battle, the Nephites did, and Mormon was a fortifier. Captain Moroni of the 73 BC Wars was his hero. He named his son after him. He was fortifying all these cities as they were being driven by the Lamanites. They went there for 4 years and fortified.
And there's a moment we'll never forget. We were led to, by some owners of the land, to climb a hill. The top 2/3 of it was man-made, and it was a hill that gave us a vantage of this entire basin, about a basin about 2 miles by 2.5 miles. And it took our breaths away when we got to the top, because as we turned around, we could see that the entire basin was filled with fortifications. We hope that when people open Light from the Dust, they'll fall in love with the Book of Mormon all over again, that they can visualize those events, those stories that are so often abstract in our minds, that they'll become tangible and real for people.
Well, and there's a spirit behind this work. It's the combination. It's not just the pictures, it's not just the text, it's not just the captions. When you see all of that, there's something that happens, and we hope that's what people will feel.
Light from the Dust, the final volume in the Light series. Now available at Deseret Book.